Well, in Gedal just to firkin fóilse rovilliad agus ócáid spéisialta seagus muid cilúrid dochid blian de service spéisialta da muinter na héireann agus acahuiire cos muinter na héireann. May I say how pleased I am to welcome our Ombudsman and Information Commissioner, Ger Deary, and the Director General, Aileen Cassidy, and indeed all of the members of the staff of the Office of the Ombudsman. I'm so pleased that you're able to join us here for what I've just said is a special occasion as we celebrate 40 years of service to the people of Ireland, and in particular to those who are fragile in relation to their empowerment, to their dealing with the state. So Treslim Levilja Gossalabert, I also want to pay tribute to all those who assisted our citizens over those 4 decades. The establishment of the Office of the Ombudsman in 1984 was a significant event in the development of Irish public administration and indeed in the development of our democracy, making as it did an important contribution in terms of accountability to the effective implementation of decisions of the Houses of the Oireachtas. I do remember very clearly that there is, of course, an association of ombudsmen indeed, and I think that Dick Roach, the former minister, and Dr. Zola was enrolled for his doctorate thesis with Basil Chubb on the notion of the ombudsperson. And for democracy to thrive, accountability is a fundamental cornerstone of citizens' rights and citizenship. In its examining of complaints from citizens who feel they have been unfairly treated by a public service provider, the Office of the Ombudsman functions as a vital, independent apparatus, ensuring that government departments, local authorities, the HSE, nursing homes and publicly funded third-level education bodies strive for fairness and thus help to achieve equality, but above all else accountable public service. I think for all in a way, to do this in a way that is transparent as regards the information it provides, as well as timely in relation to the decision-making process. It is very interesting that the concept of the Ombudsman, I remember in Great Britain, I remember when in the United Kingdom, when the debate broke out in relation to special advisors and in relation to there was a very strong debate about the idea of how outrageous it was that anybody would have challenged the views or opinions of those who had been in established positions. And it divided the social worker community in two, because you effectively had 2 people with similar training at each side and on different sides. We have had a smoother 40 years in Ireland, but the creation of an accessible, impartial grievance mechanism, one that was made available to all members of the public, acknowledged that at the heart of a commitment to participative and engaged citizenship must be a genuine desire to ensure that all citizens are enabled to exercise their voice and opinions and to see their rights and entitlements vindicated. Perhaps the most important aspect of the Ombudsman's office then is its role in addressing an imbalance in terms of empowerment, be it having empowerment or access or lack of it, of citizens to enter into informed dialogue about decisions that affect their lives and to be allowed to defend themselves or to assert their opinions when they feel their rights are being violated. You can see immediately that, in a way, to even open that conversation requires great expertise, and somebody who may say, "What are you accusing us of?" etc. So the attitude that is brought to the ombudsman process from all sides is very, very important. The ombudsman, as it were, is asked to marshal the space between law, entitlement, and practice and experience, and in doing so, it protects the true performance of democratic intent. I recall myself as a legislator, the profound frustration and dismay that I felt often when the main purpose or intent of hard-won legislative achievement was on the floors of the Dáil and Seanad chambers faded away, or contradicted, or simply negated by administrative intransigence, inertia, or a reluctance on the part of some to accept the expressed wisdom of the parliamentary system. I have already mentioned, but make no doubt whatever about that, my frustration that I often said in relation to basic rights, such as housing rights, for example, and the manner in which, if you like, the city and county management system could frustrate what were in fact debates and rights we had discussed and approved in Parliament. Parliament is at the heart of our democratic system, but acting alone, Parliament cannot ensure the delivery of citizenship, participation, equality, inclusion, and the protection of human rights. And I must recognise too that the limitations of the traditional doctrine of separation of powers, when applied in the context of complex contemporary administrative systems, is challenging. And very, very often we do have now, I think very often, one part of that division of powers expressing its frustration with another part, for example, in relation to, but they are different, and it is a very important distinction that constitutionally must be maintained between what is an elective and administrative function in terms of the cabinet and what is, for example, the role of the courts. Citizens' relationship with government and the state is at its best when rule-making and its consequences are embedded in a shared ethical context that accepts and values transparency. The challenge of our times is to be able to summon up the critical capacity that might create an adequate ethical context, one that is put into practice to all of our actions, as citizens, as bureaucratic actors, as policymakers and legislators. And too often there has been, in many ways, a suggestion in many cases that matters are so complex that ordinary people couldn't possibly understand them. I have frequently in my speeches during the presidency said, there is nothing so complex that it cannot be understood if adequately communicated. I think as well, and where we are now, after this, over years, I think in terms of global terms and external pressures, there's no doubt in my mind whatever that the greatest threat to democracy is from the expanding realm of the unaccountable. The unaccountable in terms in relation to the delivery of science and technology, the unaccountable in relation to decisions of choice between, let's say, between diplomacy and war. The issues in relation to, particularly in relation to, if you like, the ignoring of what were previously agreed international tenets of international human rights law. This is challenging in the context of the political economy paradigm, one that we have endured for over 4 decades, which placed a low or non-existent emphasis on ethics. Indeed, one of the issues that I recall myself was in relation to dealing to the chief executives of semi-state companies and others, who were simply saying straightforwardly, in many cases, we have a requirement on us to make a profit. And we have a requirement on us in relation to the interpretation of the concept of prudence, for example, was one could be in such a way as to entirely frustrate the intention of the right that had been conferred in law. I think we've seen a movement from the street, however, that's encouraging, that is attempting to bring a morally grounded model of existence into being, one that will offer a better alignment nationally and internationally between economy, society, ecology and ethics. One, I think that to pay tribute to those in my previous life, there are many people within the social sciences who have been committed to that kind of emancipatory scholarship. So they have offered us reasons to be hopeful. I think that maybe the downside of the transition to the rational has been the writings of German political economist Max Weber. There's no doubt whatever. I often think when I was teaching Weber's work and the rest of it, that it had a profound effect on him personally. It's not often stated in the biographies of Weber that he gave altogether in his entire life 54 lectures. He suffered from depression. And very much in a way, one can see where it has come, particularly, I think, from his landmark book, Economy and Society. Weber described in many ways how, if you might go from the spontaneous performance of actions to their calculated, rational delivery, that the different ideal types of public administration, their critical study of the bureaucratization of society, it became one of the most important parts of his entire work. And that's from where he probably more than anyone gave currency to the term bureaucratic. And very much, I think, back on the concepts he developed, for example, of the ritualists, of the people who took the form of the delivery of the services, the entire thing, rather than what it was supposed to achieve, or others. It's all there in Weber. So while recognizing bureaucracy is the most efficient form of rational organization, and even indispensable for some aspects of the modern state, Weber saw in it too what there was in it of a threat to individual freedom, with the ongoing bureaucratization as leading to what he called, I think, in relation to one of the passages in that, it is not the promise of spring that greets us with its shoots, but rather the icy fingers of the polar night of icy darkness. That you can see, in a way, why, in fact, it was what I was referring to really, was how the rationalization of human life is taken to extreme, trapped individuals in what he would go on to his famous formulation of the iron cage of bureaucratic, rules-based rational control. Such control that has lost the underlying purpose of actions can result in a redefinition of the ways in which the overall goals of the bureaucracy are implemented, undermining them or even delivering, in the name of rationality, reduced calculability, and at worst ritual observance, as I have said, in what will eventually be told. People are doing the most irrational things for the sake of, in fact, keeping things exactly as we should have had them. When engaging with the state in its contemporary form, we know that many of our citizens, particularly those in the margins, are often the most vulnerable, can sometimes feel as if they have entered an atmosphere of irrationality, above all else of coldness, in the sense of rules. Weber's polar ice night of icy darkness, that dehumanized landscape, is one in which some of our citizens have experienced with administration. They may feel trapped by routine and a rules-based version of procedures whose initial attention has been forgotten. I recall very well my time. I started as a local authority representative in 1974, about the way in which the person standing behind the housing desk was regarded as a punishment station, with in fact actually the manager behind having a steel thing to prevent the people from ever getting up the stairs. But the fact of the matter was, in relation to the word particular, it was always a challenge, and it's to the great credit of our public servants in many ways that they got past all of that, because very easily, the phrase, a person coming in who has distressed family, has very little opportunity of housing or something, and is greeted by the phrase, "There's nothing for you." Like that. And that did happen, and the fact that it did happen in a republic. I recall it in particular, frankly, in dealing with the travelling community in relation to their housing and children's needs when I was, as I said, a very long time in local politics. When engaging with the state in its contemporary form, we know that many of our citizens, as I have said, therefore, have had a bad experience, but it is to the great credit of all of those others who have exhibited extraordinary patience, understanding, compassion, and care and concern. And I want to thank all of those through you. I also, as well, is that when people come as far as the Ombudsman's office, they may have had different kinds of experience. I think, for example, some citizens may perceive too that their rights are subordinate or being forced to give way to a need for administrative efficiency and to bureaucratic rules and criteria that are often difficult to comprehend. And I think in that way, I think there is a particular importance attached to the Ombudsman's office having an impartial investigative experience. And through its independent oversight of the Irish bureaucratic system, the Office of the Ombudsman has over the 4 decades effected some profound and positive transformations in the delivery of public service in Ireland. The achievements of the office are significant. Its mission of promoting the principles of openness, fairness, accountability, effectiveness has played a major part in the reform, as I have said, and modernisation of our civil and public service, for which I'd like to commend it, as well as the current and past ombudsmen, who've all brought their own unique talents and skills to the role, enabling the office to continually evolve and adapt to the challenges of our ever-changing society. So aside from the daily complaints investigated, which I understand amount to about 5,000 annually, your systemic investigations have been a significant contribution to public life, resulting in substantial improvements in the lives of those impacted. I think, for example, of the Wasted Lives report concerning people under 65 years of age who have been forced to live in nursing homes, and the recent Sickness and Death report, which has led to repayments for people who had to finance their own essential healthcare abroad when the HSE was unable to deliver. I have a particular interest myself in those cases that have been referred to in terms of child carers, which I think is something that demands all of our attention. In terms of the rights sacrificed and lost by those forced, in the absence of other provision, to look after those who are dependent on them. One of the greatest achievements of the office has been in its establishing its independence. Now, this isn't always easy. Independent opinion and thought isn't always widely welcomed very often, particularly as it appears to be challenging. Michael Mills was the office's first ombudsman, and he was, I must give credit to him, anyone for whom Michael was a very good choice, able to stand his ground. He was succeeded by the late Kevin Murphy, who played a significant role in the identification of bureaucratic systemic flaws during his term as Ombudsman. Emily O'Reilly's commitment, energy and passion for human rights considerably raised the impact and profile of the office, including her achievements in ensuring the extension of the Freedom of Information Act to many public bodies. And I want to take the opportunity of saying how I so strongly support Emily O'Reilly's attempts in trying to get the European Commission to publish the human rights report in Tunisia about the treatment of people in Tunisia. What is happening in relation to Tunisia, in relation to sub-Saharan migrants, is an outrage, where with European funding, we have in fact the gravest of abuses, including sexual abuse directed against people. And in fact, the other side of the table of that agreement with Tunisia is somebody who has expressed unqualified racist opinions and so on. So I support Emily in her attempt to have the report that was commissioned published. As President of Ireland, I've had the pleasure of appointing the previous Ombudsman, Peter Tyndall, and the recently appointed incumbent Ger Deering, who I am so glad is here with us today. Peter's desire to advance the position of the office, including through the establishment of a centralised complaints handling system, and his work on lobbying transparency, which was so important, made an inspiring contribution to the history of the office. And I have no doubt whatsoever, I have every faith that as the occupants of the post have done in the past, that Ger Deering will will bring his own impressive experience on consumer and employment rights to the purpose, with his focus particularly on the rights of the marginalised. That will be a very important perspective to the ongoing development of the office, and I so offer support for the development of the office in all of these areas. So, mar facad squaris milum, ma weekas a gawaliev iliogos, Áras go raibh sibh an bhelíonn an tróna. Agus dar nói an méadtá deanta a age son muinte na héireann agus mar a gúirt mé a go háirithe cos muinte na héireann. Is ínta chun méadtá deanta agus cuim go grá agus bánacht an obair a mé siúil agus an táchaí. I so thank you all for the work that you have been doing, and so wish you well in good health and with success for all the work you will do in the future. We've been assisted here in the Áras this afternoon by musicians Claire McCaig and Kieran O'Connell on flute, Claire is on the harp. And I would like to acknowledge and commend all of you and wish you every success in the future. Míle buíochas is beag bana.